of Worship, your source for commentary and discussion on worship, theology, and culture. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones.
Hello and welcome to the Active Worship Podcast. This is Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones. Thank you for joining me today as we are continuing through the Psalm Project, and we are ending the second third of the book of Psalms here. We are in Psalm 100. We're in triple digits, and we will start Psalm 101 in the next episode. And so Psalm 100 ends this group of royal psalms that I've mentioned, Psalm 93 and then 95 through 100. And so we are here in this last royal psalm. And so much like many of the other psalms, this deals with the theme of God's awe and his power and his reign over all things. I will read the psalm. It is 5 verses, verses, and I have set this into 2 stanzas. It's a very short psalm, so let me go ahead and read for you. It is a psalm for giving thanks. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing. Know that the Lord, he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people and the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him, bless his name. For the Lord is good. His steadfast love endures forever, and his faithfulness to all generations. So this psalm is you might note some verses in it that are familiar to you. For example, verse 4, enter his gates with thanksgiving. You may know that old song. That old song when I was growing up, it was something that we sang, I think, every time we had a greeting time in church. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts with praise. We sang that song almost every week, I think. Well, not every week. There were some other ones, but that was one of them that was very common. And that idea comes from entering the tabernacle, where you enter the gates, and then you come into the courts, and you get closer and closer to the Holy of Holies. That was how the tabernacle was set up. And so this psalm talks about making a joyful noise to the Lord. And it says, make a joyful noise to the Lord, all the earth, in verse 1. So it starts off setting up the foundation that God reigns above all. So it's saying not just people, but all the earth, everyone and all inhabitants of the earth, to make a joyful noise to the Lord, because he reigns above all. And so as in the royal psalms preceding, this call goes out beyond the chosen people to all the peoples of the earth. God is their king too, whether they are aware of it or not. God is king and he reigns. Verse 2, serve the Lord with gladness. God is not a king who forces his people to serve him. He wants people to serve him with gladness. Loving service is grateful response to the grace of God. And when we realize how great his grace is, our only appropriate response is to serve him in gladness. And why would we not want to? Verse 3. Know that he is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. And we are his people and the sheep of his pasture. This is similar to Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. And so there are some royal overtones that we see on the portrayal of God as a shepherd. And then in verse 4, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. This is talking about those of the temple. This psalm actually may have been sung during a festive entry to the temple precincts. you have different models of worship that people use, but one of the most common, I'm not saying it is bad, it is one of my least favorite, but one of the most common orders of worship is called a tabernacle order. As I mentioned, you come through the gates and then into the courts and then to the Holy of Holies. And that's the idea of the tabernacle order. That's why sometimes you visit a church. I would say most churches operate this way. You visit a local church and they may start the service off with some sort of fast song, something festive, something cheerful, and then it slows down and almost in a manipulative way gets more serious and more emotional. And then the sermon, and then you have this very emotional and sort of a beckoning response time. And the idea is that you enter through the gates, and you go through the courts, and then you get into the Holy of Holies. And that's the idea of the tabernacle order of worship. And again, it's one of my least favorite, but it is probably one of the most commonly used orders of worship. But that idea comes from the physical aspect of entering the tabernacle that Israel would have approached. They would have gone through the gates and then the courts and then gotten closer to the Holy of Holies. And so that's a similar idea. And so that this is speaking of those in the temple. And that again, this psalm may have been sung during a festive entry into the temple area. Verse 5. For the Lord is good, his steadfast love endures. God's loving kindness to people who are in covenant with him. This psalm is very short, even musically. I've said it in 2 stanzas, so it's short. But offers the idea that we are to serve the Lord with gladness, that we are to worship him in the splendor of his holiness, not just because of what he has done, but because of who he is as God. He is king and he reigns over everything. So that's the idea set forth in these royal psalms. Hopefully these have helped you and given you maybe, if not a fresh look at God as king, but a reminder that he is king and he does reign over everything, even when it doesn't seem like it. Even in our lives, when our lives are in shatters, when the world seems to crumble around us, God is still in control. He still reigns, and may we never forget that. Here is Psalm 100 set to music. Thank you for listening today to the Act of Worship podcast. This is Dr. Jonathan Michael Jones. Oh, shout for joy unto the Lord, earth's people far and near. With gladness come and serve the Lord, and bring him songs of cheer. Noel, the Lord is God indeed. He made us, we are his. We are his people, and the sheep kept where his pasture is. Oh, enter through his gates with thanks, his courts approach with praise. Give thanks to him with joyfulness, and bless his name always. Because the Lord is good indeed, his mercy never